Julian adjusted his silk tie and tossed a nickel at the old man's feet. "There's some change," he sneered. "Invest it wisely." He didn't realize that the man in the tattered coat was the only person on earth who could see the $500 million mistake Julian was about to make. While the billionaire headed to the 50th floor to sign his own financial death warrant, Arthur picked up the coin, not for food, but to make a payphone call that would flip the world of high finance upside down. In 60 minutes, the man who was just a beggar would be the only one standing between Julian and total ruin. Arthur is a phantom of Wall Street, a former quantitative prodigy who disappeared after a corporate betrayal left him broken and homeless. For years, he has watched the market from the sidewalk, seeing patterns in the ticker tape that no computer can catch. When Julian, the arrogant CEO of Titan Capital, mocks him outside the building, Arthur notices a catastrophic flaw in Julian's latest merger, a liquidity ghost that will wipe out the fun. After being physically thrown out of the lobby, Arthur uses the mock nickel to call Julian's private line, reciting a forgotten algorithm that stops the funds bleeding in real time. Stunned, Julian brings Arthur to the penthouse to save the day, only to discover a terrifying truth. Arthur didn't just fix the trade, he triggered a founder's clause hidden in the firm's original code. Arthur wasn't just a genius, he was the original owner Julian had cheated years ago, and by saving the fund, Arthur just took back his throne. Thank you for sticking around with me, my wonderful story family. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comment where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. Arthur watched the green text of the outdoor ticker crawl across the glass of Titan Towers, but he didn't see numbers. He saw a heartbeat flatlining. To the suits rushing past, the 4% surge in Ethel Corp was a victory lap. To Arthur, it was a siren song leading them toward a cliff. His eyes, rimmed with the redness of a night spent on a subway grate, tracked the volume. It was too thin. The bids were hollow. Julian's firm wasn't just buying a stock. They were walking into a vacuum of liquidity that would swallow them whole. Suddenly, the street began to vibrate. The ticker paused, flickered, and then the numbers began to tumble. Not in a slide, but in a freefall. Arthur's breath hitched. He saw the Titan signature trades hitting the tape, desperate buy orders trying to prop up the price. But it was like trying to stop a tidal wave with a paper shield. Julian was doubling down. Every second that passed, millions of dollars, money belonging to teachers, firefighters, and retirees, was being vaporized into the digital ether. Arthur lunged toward the revolving glass doors, his tattered coat flapping like the wings of a scavenger. "Stop the execution," he screamed, his voice rasping from weeks of silence. "You're buying ghosts. The liquidity isn't there." The security guards moved instantly, their hands reaching for their belts. Arthur dodged a heavy arm, his eyes locked on the elevator bank where the floor indicator was climbing toward the 50th floor penthouse. "Julian!" he roared, slamming his fist against the reinforced glass. "Check the dark pools. The sell side is a trap." A heavy hand gripped Arthur's throat, slamming him back against the concrete pillar as the ticker above them turned a violent, bleeding red. The Ethel Corp price vanished entirely, replaced by a flashing white halted. The lead guard leaned in, his breath hot against Arthur's face. "One more word, old man, and you leave here in a bag." But as Arthur struggled for air, he looked up at the 50th floor. The lights in the penthouse began to flicker, and a distant, muffled alarm started to wail from deep within the building's core. The trap had just snapped shut, and the man who had mocked him was currently losing everything. 50 floors above the pavement, the air in the Titan Capital war room had turned toxic. Julian stood at the head of a mahogany table, his knuckles white as he leaned over a Bloomberg terminal that was screaming in a high-pitched digital pulse. The sure-thing merger had become a massacre. Just minutes ago, Julian had been sipping a triple espresso, laughing about the old man on the street. Now he was watching his net worth dissolve like salt in a storm. "Why isn't the order filling?" Julian roared, his voice cracking with a frantic, sharp edge. "I moved 10 million shares. Fill the damn order." His head of trading, a man with 20 years on the floor whose face was now the color of ash, shook his head violently. There are no buyers, Julian. We're in a liquidity vacuum. Every time we bid, the price gaps down another 3 points. It's a ghost trade. The sellers aren't human. It's an algorithmic, predatory loop. The screens flickered, reflecting off Julian's sweating forehead. A giant red notification box popped up, covering his P&L. Margin call. Action required. The fund's primary lender was pulling the plug. If they didn't find $500 million in liquidity within the next 10 minutes, the bank would seize every asset in the Titan portfolio. Julian felt his stomach drop away. This wasn't just a bad day. This was the end of his bloodline's legacy. Sell the London holdings. Dump the gold. Do anything, Julian screamed, grabbing a glass of water and throwing it against the wall in a blind rage. The glass shattered, but the sound was drowned out by the roar of the trading floor outside his glass office. His staff was in a full-blown mutiny, phones ringing off the hooks with calls from enraged billionaires and pension fund trustees demanding answers he didn't have. Suddenly, the lights in the office dimmed to a deep, ominous amber. The emergency backup power. The main servers were failing under the weight of the sell-off. Julian collapsed into his leather chair, his breath coming in shallow, jagged gasps. He looked out the window, down toward the street where he had mocked the beggar. For the first time in his life, he felt the cold hand of true poverty reaching up for him. The head of trading stumbled back into the room, his eyes wide with a new kind of terror. Julian, someone just bypassed our firewall. They're sending a message directly to your personal terminal. It's encrypted with a 128-bit founder's key that hasn't been used since the 90s. Julian lunged for the keyboard, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The screen cleared, and a single line of text appeared in jagged, old-school green font. You have 9 minutes before the liquidity trap turns into a permanent grave. Check the nickel. The lobby of Titan Towers was a cathedral of glass and cold judgment, and Arthur was its desecration. Outside, the midday sun beat down on the pavement, but inside, the air conditioning felt like the breath of a glacier. Arthur lunged for the security desk again, his boots sliding on the polished marble. You don't understand, he shrieked, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. The servers are looping. If you don't kill the feed to the London Exchange, the entire fund is gone. The lead guard, a man whose neck was thick as a fire hydrant, didn't even look Arthur in the eye. To him, this wasn't a man. It was a nuisance to be erased. He jammed a heavy forearm into Arthur's chest, pinning him against a pillar. I told you once, garbage. You don't belong in this air. Behind the desk, a junior guard laughed, casually tossing Arthur's meager cardboard sign into a trash bin. The power gap was a canyon. On one side stood the men who controlled the world's wealth, and on the other stood a man who didn't even own his own shoes. Arthur's heart hammered a frantic rhythm. He could see the chaos reflecting in the mirrored elevator doors, staffers running, the digital tickers overhead stuttering into total darkness. I'm not asking for money, Arthur gasped, clawing at the guard's sleeve. I'm the only one who knows the override. Tell Julian the Black Swan protocol is active. The guard sneered, his grip tightening until Arthur's vision began to blur. Julian wouldn't breathe the same air as you, let alone take your advice. Now get out before I break your ribs. He began to drag Arthur toward the revolving doors, the old man's heels screeching across the stone. Arthur looked up, desperate, and saw a crowd of wealthy passers-by parting like he was a plague. With a surge of adrenaline, Arthur bit down on the guard's hand. The man roared in pain, releasing his grip for a split second. Arthur dived toward the lobby's massive floor-to-ceiling window, reaching into his pocket for the only tool he had left, a half-melted bar of stolen hotel soap. As the guards lunged to tackle him to the ground, Arthur's hand flew across the glass in a blur of frantic genius. He wasn't writing a plea for help. He was writing a mathematical death warrant. Just as the heavy boots of 4 officers slammed into his back, the elevator chimes rang out with a sharp, high-pitched chime. The doors slid open, and a white-faced Julian stumbled out, clutching the nickel in a hand that wouldn't stop shaking. The weight of 3 grown men crushed Arthur against the cold marble, but his right arm remained free, moving with the frantic, rhythmic grace of a conductor. The bar of soap hissed against the glass. leaving behind thick, white streaks of advanced calculus that defied every standard market model. Arthur didn't feel the knees in his back or the handcuffs biting into his wrists. He only felt the math. It was a complex differential equation, a map of the liquidity ghost that was currently dismembering Julian's empire. "Get him off the glass!" the sergeant bellowed, his voice echoing through the silent, horrified lobby. "He's defacing the property. Scrape that filth off." A security guard grabbed a cleaning rag, ready to erase the only thing that could save the city's economy. But a scream from the mezzanine froze him in his tracks. "Don't you touch that window!" Julian was leaning over the gold-plated railing, his face ghostly, his eyes locked on the soap-streaked glass. From his bird's-eye view, the equations aligned perfectly with the floor-to-ceiling digital tickers. He wasn't looking at graffiti, he was looking at a masterpiece. The equations on the glass began to glow as the sun hit them, revealing a hidden exit strategy for the $500 million trap. "The derivative loop," Julian whispered, his voice trembling as he looked from the nickel in his palm to the math on the window. He isn't just predicting the crash, he's timing the heartbeat of the algorithm. Below, the guards ignored Julian's cry, slamming Arthur's face into the floor. Blood smeared against the white marble. But Arthur's eyes remained fixed on the glass. "The third line," he choked out, gasping through a mouthful of dust. "Julian, the third line is the key. Flip the leverage before the clock hits 0. Julian lunged for the stairs, nearly tumbling over the railing in his desperation. He didn't care about the cameras or the crowd of socialites filming the scene on their phones. He reached the lobby floor just as the guards were hauling Arthur toward the service exit. "Stop!" Julian roared, his voice cracking with an authority born of pure terror. "Let him go! That man stays!" But as Julian reached the window to memorize the final variable, a loud metallic crack echoed through the building. The massive digital ticker overhead shuddered, turned a blinding electric white, and began to smoke. The servers were melting down. Julian looked at the window, then at Arthur, then at the smoking monitors. "It's too late," Julian gasped, the air leaving his lungs. "The system is dead. We can't execute the trade." Arthur looked up, a bloody smile spreading across his cracked lips. "The system isn't dead, Julian. It's just waiting for its real father." The elevator ascent felt like a rocket launch into a dying sun. When the doors hissed open on the 50th floor, the smell of ozone and burnt high-end electronics hit Arthur like a physical blow. The war room was a scene from a digital apocalypse. Ivy League analysts, men with degrees from Harvard and Yale that cost more than Arthur's childhood home, were weeping openly or staring at frozen monitors with hollow eyes. Julian shoved Arthur toward the central terminal, the one glowing a predatory, unrelenting red. "Fix it!" Julian screamed over the sound of a dozen cooling fans spinning at terminal velocity. "The servers are fried. We're locked out." Arthur didn't hesitate. He shoved a frantic trader out of the chair and placed his blackened, trembling fingers onto the keyboard. The analysts scoffed, one sneering through his tears. "What is he going to do? He doesn't even know Python." But as Arthur's fingers began to dance, the screen didn't show code. It showed a direct command line interface that predated the firm's existence. He wasn't typing. He was communicating with the skeleton of the market. "You're trying to exit through the front door," Arthur muttered, his voice gaining a terrifying, rhythmic clarity. "But the front door is a hologram. You have to collapse the bridge." He began bypassing firewalls with terrifying ease, his hands moving so fast they became a blur. Suddenly, the frozen screens flickered. The bleeding red numbers stabilized. Then, in a move that defied every economic textbook, they began to turn a bright electric green. Arthur wasn't just saving the fund. He was cannibalizing the very predators that had set the trap. "He's shorting the dark pool liquidity," the head analyst whispered, his jaw dropping. "That's impossible. He's out-trading the neural network." The P&L surged. 10 million regained. 50 million. 200 million. The room went silent, the only sound the mechanical clicking of Arthur's keyboard. But as the final trade hit the tape, and the room erupted in a tentative cheer, Arthur's hands suddenly froze. He stared at a blinking cursor in the corner of the screen, a ghost white icon of a key. His face went pale. He slowly turned to look at Julian, who was grinning like a madman at the recovered fortune. "The trade is done," Arthur whispered, his voice trembling with a new dark realization. "But Julian, the system didn't just accept my override. It recognized my biometric signature from 20 years ago." He pointed to the bottom of the screen, where a system notification was slowly scrolling. "Welcome home, founder. Emergency reinstatement protocol engaged. Please confirm identity to access the secret vault." The silence in the war room was heavier than the chaos that had preceded it. The green numbers on the monitors stayed frozen, a digital monument to a miracle. Julian stood behind Arthur, his breathing finally slowing, his eyes darting between the welcome home notification and the ragged man sitting in his million-dollar chair. The terror in Julian's eyes was being rapidly replaced by a cold, calculating greed. He realized the room was full of witnesses, Ivy League elites who had just seen a homeless man do the impossible. He couldn't let the founder narrative breathe. "Incredible performance," Julian said, his voice dropping into a smooth artificial baritone. He signaled to two large men by the door, not the lobby guards but his private fixers. Julian reached into his inner suit pocket, pulled out a checkbook, and scribbled a number with a gold-plated fountain pen. He ripped the paper off with a sharp snap and laid it on the console next to Arthur's grime-stained hand. $100,000. It's more than you'd beg for in a lifetime. Take it, and there's a car waiting downstairs to take you to a hotel far away from this district." Arthur didn't look at the check. He looked at the reflection of the blinking founder icon in the darkened glass of the terminal. "You think you can buy a ghost, Julian? I didn't save this fund for the money. I saved it because I built these bones. I know every line of code in the vault you're trying to hide." Julian's face hardened, the mask of gratitude slipping to reveal a predatory sneer. "You built bones 20 years ago. Now you're a vagrant with a lucky guess. If you stay, I'll have you arrested for corporate espionage and hacking. If you leave now, you're a rich man." He leaned in closer, his voice a lethal whisper. "Choose carefully, Arthur. People like you don't get second chances. They get forgotten." Julian gestured, and the two fixers stepped forward, their shadows looming over Arthur. One of them reached down, his hand like a vice around Arthur's bicep, physically hoisting him from the chair. Arthur's tattered coat snagged on the armrest, the fabric tearing with a sound like a dying gasp. They began to drag him toward the private service elevator, the Ivy League analysts looking away in a collective act of cowardice. "The check, Julian!" Arthur shouted, his voice echoing through the sterile office as the elevator doors began to slide shut. "You forgot the most important rule of the code I wrote." Julian smirked, turning back to his terminal to begin the process of wiping the session history. "And what's that, old man?" Arthur's eyes burned with a terrifying prophetic light as the gap between the doors narrowed to a sliver. "A ghost doesn't just haunt the house. A ghost owns the keys. Look at the clock, Julian. Look at the clock." As the doors slammed shut, a deep, rhythmic thud began to vibrate through the floorboards, the sound of every electronic lock in the building engaging simultaneously. Suddenly, every screen in the penthouse didn't show the market anymore. They showed a single high-definition image, a scanned copy of a 1998 partnership agreement with Julian's signature and Arthur's. The vibration in the floor intensified until the floor-to-ceiling windows rattled in their frames. Julian lunged for his keyboard, but the keys were dead, locked behind a crimson system override banner. The 1998 partnership agreement on the screens began to glow, the pixels sharpening until the name Arthur Vance, majority shareholder, burned into the retinas of everyone in the room. The fixers froze at the elevator, their hands slipping off Arthur's arms as the service doors hummed and slid open of their own accord. Arthur didn't run. He walked back into the center of the war room with the slow, deliberate stride of a king returning from exile. "What is this?" Julian screamed, his voice reaching a panicked, glass-shattering pitch. "I terminated your rights. I buried you." "You buried a man," Arthur said, his voice now a low, resonant boom that commanded the silence of the room. "But you kept my heart in your servers. When I fixed that trade, I didn't just move capital. I triggered the resurrection clause. The moment this firm hit a liquidity of near zero, The board's emergency bylaws were superseded by the founder's kill switch. As of 60 seconds ago, your shares have been diluted to zero. You aren't the CEO, Julian. You're a trespasser. The security team's tablets chimed simultaneously. They looked at the screens, then at Julian, then at the man in the tattered coat. Without a word, the lead fixer stepped toward Julian. "Sir," the guard said, his voice cold and professional, "your access has been revoked. We're going to have to escort you to the curb." Julian scrambled backward, tripping over his designer leather chair, the chair Arthur had occupied minutes before. "This is my company. I built this," he shrieked as the guards hoisted him by his elbows, his $100,000 watch catching the light one last time before he was dragged toward the exit, his expensive shoes screeching against the marble. Arthur walked to the head of the table. He picked up the nickel Julian had thrown at him and placed it on the mahogany surface with a metallic clink. He sat in the chair, the welcome home notification finally turning a peaceful, steady white. He looked at the trembling Ivy League analysts and leaned into the microphone. "Listen closely," Arthur whispered. "The market is open, and we have a lot of change to make." But as the room exhaled in relief, a final, blood-red notification flashed on the master screen. It wasn't a market crash. It was a live video feed from a hidden vault beneath the building, and the safe was already open.